Hi there. Welcome to Quarantine History with Mr. Skaggs. I'm Mr. Skaggs. I am a 7th grade history teacher in Tennessee, and I thought I would take a few minutes and do a little bit of a history review with some of my students and anyone who might be curious. Because we don't know how long we're going to be out of school. We don't know how long we're going to be off a normal schedule. And so I thought to bring a little bit of normalcy to it. And these were the things I was going to be talking about anyway if we were in school. What better time to do it than now? So, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be reviewing things that came from a recent benchmark that my students took, and I'm going to be addressing some standards and some questions that they were having some issues and trouble with. And how I'm going to be finding these is through the Tennessee State History Standards. And you can have those because technology is super cool. You can have them on your phone. So, what you'll need to do, download the Tennessee Standards app. You'll open that up. You'll go to History, Social Studies, and then you'll just scroll over to 7th grade, and boom, you have 65 wonderful standards of history. No, I'm not going to talk through all 65 of them, but I will address some that I was going to do with my students anyway. And I will put a link in the description down below to where you can download that yourself and kind of keep up with those. And if you happen to have any questions about them, post them in the comments and we might talk about that more later. So today, first standard we want to look at is going to be standard 745. And so 745 is to explain the significant causes of the Protestant Reformation, including the Catholic Church's taxation policies, selling of indulgences, and Martin Luther's 95 Theses. This was something we talked about in January and was going to review it with you guys real quick. So, background information. 16th century, Catholic Church, most powerful, influential institution headed by the Pope. This is based out of Rome in Italy. And it wasn't just church practices that the Pope and the Catholic Church was in charge of, but they actually dictated a lot of social activity. They gave guidance to governments and kings, many times having more power than a king. And then also gave influence to military actions as well. You can look at the Crusades being the main kind of example of how they could order a military to go and do something. And so moving into the 16th century, some other things that allowed the church to be as powerful as it was just a couple things here that we had addressed in class. So number one, the church was very wealthy because everyone was mandated to pay a tithe or a tenth of their income to the church. Now, we think of this more today as a tax, like you pay at the grocery store, you pay off your income, but they call this a tithe. Now, the tithe today is not mandatory. You pay it if you like, but not so much in this instance. So the church made a lot of money off these tithes. Second thing that helped them was all masses, that's the church service, no matter if it was in Italy, France, Germany, they were all in Latin. So if you didn't speak Latin, you had to trust what everybody told you. So it helped the church stay in power because people couldn't really question what was being asked to them because it wasn't in a language they could understand. Next thing that would go along with that was people didn't question the church because it was believed that the church's authority on scripture and on religious doctrine was the final say. And a lot of that came back to what the Pope said. So whatever the Pope said, being sort of the representation of God on earth, was believed that he spoke for God, and what he said pretty much is how it had to be. So if the church said something, you would just go along with it. And something that people began to kind of go along with was this practice called the sale of indulgences. Now, indulgences, they were a item that one could buy in order to shorten your time spent in purgatory. So purgatory, real quick what purgatory is. Purgatory was the belief in the Catholic Church that when you died, not everyone went straight to heaven or went straight to hell. That there was this idea of purgatory being this in-between place where people would go to sort of atone for their sins, to wait it out, almost like a celestial timeout. And then eventually, you would get to go to heaven if you stayed in purgatory for long enough, if you weren't that bad of a person. And what purgatory could do, as with indulgences, you could buy an indulgence for yourself or for someone you knew. And when you bought this, it was supposed to shorten the amount of time spent in purgatory. And there was a famous saying, it was like a saily catchphrase that when a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. That's so good. Love it. And so this practice of sailing indulgences became very popular, and it actually made the church a whole lot of money. And part of that money was initially to help build the St. Peter's Basilica, was using the funds off of that to build it. And with this sale of indulgences, it really started to add to more wealth into the church, but also it caused some tension. And the main tension with the sale of indulgence came from a priest and monk named Martin Luther. He was a German monk and priest who, funny enough, originally was a university law degree dropout. And the story goes as he was going home from school to break the news that, hey, I can't do school, it's not my thing, he was struck by lightning. And he didn't die, obviously. And when he was struck by lightning, he began to kind of question his eternal salvation. He's like, oh no, I'm going to die. What's going to happen? And what this did was him questioning his salvation brought him to become a monk, to begin studying the Bible, the work of other theologians, and to also pray all the time. We talked about monks. The cycle of their life was reading, praying, working, reading, praying, working, a little bit of sleep, repeat. That's how their lives went. And as Martin Luther began to study the Bible, and not just what he was told by other church officials, by bishops, by cardinals, by other priests, when he began to read the Bible himself, he figured out that many of the things that the church was saying and practicing wasn't in the Bible. And namely, it was the sale of indulgences. As he studied the Bible, he couldn't find that anywhere. And he especially got more and more reason to go against the sale of indulgences and other church practices when he read the works of Paul, for a New Testament preacher and church planter. And he began reading his books of the New Testament and saw where he really kind of said, no, you can't do anything good to get in heaven. You can't buy an indulgence. You can't be nice to people. You can't go to church or pray as much to get you into heaven. That's not how you get there. And what he found was that salvation, that ability to get to heaven, to have assurance for when you died, came from what he would teach, not by good works, but salvation through faith in the person and work of Jesus. That was it. None of this other church stuff that the church was preaching was going to get you to heaven from the view of Martin Luther. And so what he did was he took his frustration with the sale of indulgences, the power of the Pope, and he wrote down what is known today as the 95 Theses. So 95 things that he did not agree with the Catholic Church about. And like most people, when you don't agree with someone about something, he posted it on Facebook. No, he didn't post it on Facebook, but he kind of did the closest thing from the 16th century. What he did was he took this big, long paper, and he nailed it to the door of the local church. That was in Wittenberg, Germany. And it was sort of like where you could go to read stuff, like your Facebook wall, or maybe a community bulletin board, a calendar, on the door to this church. And he did this on October 31st, 1517. And he put it up there so everyone could see that he did not agree with these particular practices of the church. And boy howdy, the church noticed this. He was called before a council asking to recant that, no, Martin Luther, you're wrong in what you're saying. Don't question the church. What you're saying is crazy. And he couldn't say no to it. So it got the church's attention, but it also got the attention of other people, because recently before this was the invention of Gutenberg's movable type printing press, which allowed people to read better access to books, literature, and in particular the Bible. And so Martin Luther saying, no, these things are not in the Bible, inspired other people to read their Bibles and see, was what the church was saying, was it right, was it not right? And so this would then encourage other people to do the same later on. And we could go into that more, but not for this time. But And this is also known as, accredited as the beginning point of the Protestant Reformation. That was a split in the Catholic Church, which would then bring rise to a whole nother division of Christianity known as Protestantism. And you may be like, Mr. Skaggs, why does that matter? Protestantism, Reformation, whatever. Well, simply put, if you go to church and you do not happen to go to a Catholic church, it is because of the Protestant Reformation. There are now other denominations or groups within Christianity. You can think of Baptist, Church of Christ, Nazarene, Lutheran. Lutheran. Martin Luther is also known for starting the Lutheran Church, which is actually the very first official Protestant church. That's a bonus bit of info for you. And so that is why I think that looking at the Reformation, looking at this fact is pretty important, not just so you know it, so it's a standard, but this does have lasting effects on how we all live today. That because of this, there are different churches. There's not just one church, the Catholic Church that you go to, but there's others that you can go to. And I think that is an important thing to look at as well when thinking about this information. So that's a quick recap on 745, the causes of the Protestant Reformation, including Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe right down below. I'll be posting these often, don't know how often, but I will be posting more of these, like I said, to help my students keep refreshed on history during our long extended break. And if you have anything you want me to cover or talk about as you're looking at your standards, feel free to post them down in the comments, and I hope to talk to you soon.